All right, thank you, Rebecca. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Noting that all of the board members are here. Tim is with us. Randy is home ill. We wish him our best. So the first thing I'd like to do is have a motion to approve the agenda.
So move. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we have a few public comments, so I will call those people up next before we begin our agenda. Starting with Bethany Pottinger. We don't have a microphone there, but
I'm a teacher. I have a loud voice.
good. We need a gym voice today.
Sounds good. So my name is Bethany Pottinger. I have been a first grade teacher here in Waunakee for 9 years, and I was a member of the DEI committee. First, I want to thank you guys for the time and energy that you're taking to tackle the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As one of the former committee members who spent 60+ hours working for this cause, I fully appreciate the kind of mental and emotional energy that it costs. What I came here to address is the transition from the ad hoc DEI committee to the standing DEI committee. Back in August and September, when we were preparing our recommendations and report for the board, no one knew what decision the board was going to make. I was prepared for the committee to be disbanded, and I'm really relieved that it was not just taken away. I was also prepared to continue the work and tackle the job of figuring out how the committee should evolve after finishing the audit and report. What never occurred to me was that the committee would continue without any of the members who had worked so hard on it and without the opportunity to give any input to the new committee. I listened to your meeting last week, and I just kept thinking how much time could have been saved and how much clarity could have been accomplished if there had been a transition meeting with us to discuss how we came to our conclusions, what we saw as working on the committee, and what we saw as areas for improvement, because who would know better than us? We could have told you about the work that was in progress. For example, I was on a subcommittee creating a list of common terminology, in part inspired by a public comment from my friend Mr. Dentz at one of our committee meetings. And that Google Doc is just waiting to be finished. But we didn't have an opportunity to meet again to discuss, should we continue, should we wait, and so forth. And I wasn't sure if you guys were aware that that existed. So thankfully, it's not too late. As you can see, there are many members of the former DEI committee here, ready and willing to help you out. I'd also like to speak to the makeup of the committee going forward. One of the things I was most proud of on our committee was the fact that we had parents, students, teachers, and community members represented on our committee, not just board members. I know you talked about having listening sessions and engagement sessions, and I wholeheartedly support that idea. But that doesn't have the same power as serving on a committee with people who have different experiences, hearing their stories, developing relationships, and sitting across the table from them regularly to do the work. What gave me the urgency to keep meeting and putting in hours of work on subcommittees in addition to the whole committee was these relationships. I know that's not how things have been done in the past, but the way things have been done in the past hasn't led to the change our community is calling for. I hope that you consider having a wider group so that you have regular diversity of voice. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing.
Thank you, Bethany. Julie Larson.
Hi, thanks again for letting us come and speak tonight. I would like to give my support for keeping the DEI committee as the 3 elected board members. I like the idea of having the community engagement meetings so that everyone can be included. I think it makes sense to take a step back and hear from the community before the committee makes any more recommendations to the board. Now there's a lot more awareness about the DEI committee, and we're coming out of the pandemic, so I think it's a really good time to allow for more voices to be heard. I do not believe the board should doubt their ability to lead the committee. The thinking seems to be that you're not diverse enough by the arbitrary standards of some. But you are representatives of the community because you have been elected by the diverse residents of Waunakee. I'm sure you want all community members to have an equal chance to be involved with the DEI. I want to know the details of how you would go about adding more members to the committee. I think it would be really difficult to ensure that the new members would fairly represent everyone in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Greg Gens?
Hello, my name is Greg Gens. I have 2 daughters in the district. I'm here after last board meeting. The comments by member Hofer and Betcher indicated that a 3-person board committee would only require or allow for public comments back and forth where there's no discussion. That was an inaccurate, statement about what was presented. It was about community engagements, about where there is back and forth communication. Prior to the previous subcommittee being, or DEI committee being released, there were parents that came in and discussed their concerns about ideology. And that difference of ideology, in my view, is rather than using a racial or gender identity ideology, which I think creates some division, I think it's important to go forward with a intrinsic equal human value lens as we go forward. That's where we want to end up. I think it's important to address current situations and incidents that happen of prejudice and bias, immediately rebuke them and deal with them with harsh consequence. That's appropriate. People like me, as we came in, were labeled by the previous DEI, some membership, as saying hateful things, and our conduct was unbecoming, like clapping, or some gasps at some rhetoric. So much so that the previous chairperson even talked about potentially having police presence because of what we might do. I can't think of anything that's more like cancel cultural than us coming in and just saying our opinion and then being told that it's about hate. After you did dismiss the committee, you were labeled as not having the appropriate training. They were asking what training you were going to get. They didn't have any training. They were talking about that you didn't know what was going on in the school. In fact, so much that you've created a situation in the school where people don't trust coming to administration, where they rightly should go. And if there is that should be fixed there. You're not the community complaint department, but I think that's kind of what the last DEI committee at that annual meeting ended up talking about, is that they wanted to be the moral arbiter of policy and HR policy and curriculum. They even stated that in their recommendations at the very end of them, that those things should be going through them to make sure that DEI in their ideology was sufficient. And that's not what we need right now. We need to have everybody on an equal footing, not having people appointed, because of demographics, which honestly is probably illegal. But we need to be able to hear from anybody who has any different ideology, opposing ideologies, not labeling them using cancel culture. That's what happens when you're trying to coerce an idea, not persuade with thought and presentation of civil discourse. So I would just ask you to please keep going forward for right now, as we get more input, a 3 BOE membership, which you guys are all duly elected. When you appoint anyone, whether it's students or community members, that's elevating people and their ideology above other people. And it's been asked of me, and I believe the previous chairperson was asked too, would we volunteer if a couple people were brought into this DEI subcommittee? And I believe we both said yes, but I firmly believe that that is the wrong way to go. I don't want the voice and thought that, I'm talking about not to be represented. But I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, because you're elevating other people's ideologies and thoughts above others. Give everyone the equal opportunity at these community engagement meetings to come to you and have the equal footing, not being elevated above other people. So I appreciate you listening. I appreciate the comments and decisions at the last BOE meeting about not, partnering with another agenda partisan group, the WPEN. I appreciate the hardship that you guys go through, not being able to really satisfy any of us. And I appreciate everybody, regardless of what their opinion is, if they think, they bandy about with, last meeting, somebody talked about white supremacy. It's just more cancel culture. We've got to get away from that. People have run, some of those people have run for board positions, run for village board positions, and community has not elevated them to that representative position. They have you. So please keep it to 3 BOE member with community engagement. Thank you.
Meredith, is it Yelp?
Like,
So you don't pronounce the Y or the L.
oh, I must have like misspelled. It's a G. I just wrote it very
Oh.
quickly. I'm sorry. I was gonna-
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm sorry. Hi again. My name is Meredith Glick, and I have 2 kids in the school district. And so there's a lot of evidence that trends and actions at the national level are hitting close to home here in Waunakee, in the Waunakee School District. Namely, there's an attack against the Waunakee schools and the board for creating the DEI committee and acting on the audit's findings. And relatedly, there's sort of an attack on the schools under the guise of concern about critical race theory. These amounts to efforts to stop the Waunakee School District from becoming more inclusive, equitable, and diverse. I mean, across the US, I'm sure many of you have seen, there are numerous efforts to censor and silence teaching, either banning books, reviewing and changing curriculum. It's sort of shocking to me. These are attacks against our teachers and our schools and the curriculum and the books teachers and students have access to. And it's further, this whole situation is complicated by, well, not only the pandemic, but the state legislature continually reducing public school funding. In the words of Bernice King, we cannot allow our children's education around this nation's history to be caught up in divisive schemes that have emerged from a backlash to the racial awakening and drive to push for racial equity and inclusion that occurred in our world on the heels of the George Floyd killing. I mean, I know CRT is not being taught in Waunakee schools. Still, I personally believe it's a really useful lens for investigating injustice and for how laws have perpetuated discrimination. I believe racism is systemic in the United States, and I'm trying to help my kids understand this too, so they can help make the world a better place. Again, I urge you to commit to helping making our school district more just and equitable and diverse through acting on recommendations, either that were formulated previously or those that you continue to find and create. And I encourage you to draw on the former members' commitment and expertise and those of students. And as much as I empathize with all of you for being in the middle of these debates, in the middle of a pandemic, it is you who have an opportunity to act. So please do so.
Thank you, Meredith. Diane Tracerosk.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Tracerosk, and I have a graduate from the Waunakee schools. And I have emailed and spoken, I think, quite a bit before, so I'm going to limit my comments to just 4 points. First, I want to thank you for carefully looking over the recommendations of the DEI committee and thinking about how to best organize the work. That's an assignment to a committee, for example, in a HR type piece, so that we can move it forward. That does make sense to me. And then second, I'd encourage, as you're thinking about the work of this committee, to think about the routine so that you can follow progress or take stock in terms of what's happened and the recommendations. I think great thing about thinking about how other committees can look at the work is that they're the committees that deal with curriculum or human resources. And then there's also a risk of some ideas or thoughts being lost. So I think to have a feedback process would be good. Third, I think one of the reasons why perhaps you're thinking about disseminating some of the work to other committees is there are many recommendations. It's a rather large workload. And I think as a person that served on the DEI committee, we spent a lot of time. I've mentioned that before. So that is one of the reasons that I think it's helpful to have I will continue to advocate for some community voices on this subcommittee, because there'll be elements, whether it's facilitating public events where there is conversation and whatnot. I think extra hands at the table would really be helpful, and being able, I think I gave some rather specific recommendations in a more recent email, but having some continuity from the committee might be helpful to your work as well. And then I'm going to agree. I think we would all love to do away with white supremacy and leave it behind us. There's no doubt about it. I don't think we're there yet. I think we just have some more work to do in terms of what people are experiencing in terms of discrimination. And I bet we'd all be perhaps wishing that we were at home with our families or doing other things. But until we can really resolve the work and deal with the different factors within our school district that may or may not support students, here we are. So thanks for your work. I really appreciate that you're giving your time to yet another committee, and have a great night.
Thank you, Diane. Nina Bain.
It's me, Evan. Thank you. Hi, I'm a mom of 2 kids here in Waunakee and an assistant director for the Department of Public Education, actually. A lot of things I'm thinking about saying, but I'm going to narrow it down to 2 things. One, the absurdity of the 3 committees. And then 2, when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion in the frame of what I understood it when I was on the committee that now has been dissolved, is that diversity, equity, inclusion is about a subset of people that are not part of the majority. So in the case of Waunakee, that would be anybody who's not white, by just visually looking at them. So for instance, Joel and myself, we would be a minority in this room. So my understanding is that that group is to help support that particular community. Now, if that was wrong, then I would have really liked to know that. I mean, like that was the frame by which it was brought to me. It's also the frame by which working at Jeff 3 downtown, that's how it's framed as well. Diversity, equity, inclusion is whatever my near northern was. So if this is a room full of, let's say, Black people, then perhaps you would be a minority. And then this would be your committee. That being said, I just think it's very absurd to have 3 white people on diversity, equity, inclusion. It'd be absurd. Kind of like I was thinking to myself, if I started a German heritage club with myself, 2 other people who are non-German, and then attempt to create some sort of plan with that, it just doesn't, it doesn't line up for me, doesn't make sense. That being said, what is this diversity, equity, inclusion you're talking about? You're talking about just like, okay, we're gonna take whatever community we have, which is what, like 90 plus white, and then we're just gonna include everybody. Well then, yeah, your committee makes sense. But that was not the way it was explained to me. And that's not how I understood it. And clearly we've got people sitting here who thought it was inclusive of like every person. And it is, because truly, from my point of view, I don't know what the fear of this committee is. Really, when we were working on this, it was literally like, if a student experiences racism, how do they bring it up? Because racism exists here in Waunakee. I can attest to that. I went to Piggly Wiggly and I literally had some guy, middle-aged white guy, say, hey, you chink, get the F out of here, go back to China. We're not Chinese, I was born in St. Mary's. So I would just like to clarify to anybody who doesn't believe that racism doesn't exist in Waunakee, that in fact, it really does exist here in Waunakee. Fear exists in Waunakee. That's why we're having this meeting. That's why people are here. And I just really want you to reconsider what you think of when you think of a committee of 3 people to represent a diversity, equity, and inclusion team. Because I have to say, I'm not really seeing it, but perhaps I don't have the correct understanding of what you want from a diversity, equity, and inclusion team. Oh, I did think of one other thing. That being said, if we're just speaking along the lines of schools, I have to say, overall, I'm disappointed with the Department of Public Education as it relates to the performance of minority students and white students, particularly Black students. Wisconsin has been #1 in the gap between the achievements of white students and Black students for like a very long time. And we've been working on this whole diversity, equity, inclusion to close that gap for very, very long. And clearly we're not doing something right because that hasn't changed. Now, I don't belong in that group. I sit very happily, I guess, in the Asian group where we're doing great, but that doesn't mean that I don't care about students who aren't doing well. That's it. I could keep going, but
Thank you.
don't have the time.
Joel, Lewis.
Good evening. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk. I actually wasn't going to speak tonight, but I think the more I listen, I just want to say thank you because this work is hard. It's not easy. But the thing is, it's necessary. We do have a growing population of minority individuals here in Waunakee. This is not, I don't know, what 15,000 people is what we have, but there's so many subsets of individuals here who are experiencing racism. So to be able, some people dismiss it like it's not a big deal, like we just need to just get along, and if something happens, we just need to respond. That's good if you're white, but the thing is that as a Black male living in Waunakee for 10+ years, I deal with racism. Not saying that that's everybody, but my kids who are also biracial also deal with stuff as well, or have. So the thing is that it's not going away. It's going to continue, but I feel like since we have such a great school, and I wouldn't move here if I didn't feel like I loved this community and I wanted to have my kids be part of the school system. But if we're supposed to be great, then we should be great in every area. You know, the thing is that I feel like we're trying to convince you to do the work. I have a problem with that. This work just needs to be done and it needs to move forward. You know, a 3-person committee does not make any sense at all. And the thing is that what Nia said too, you know, you talk about where is the representation of other groups. So you can go and try to solicit that through listening sessions, but that's not the same. And the thing is that our ad hoc committee worked for every child, every student. We didn't just say this one subset or this one population is what we're working for. Training and education is important. So every time I keep hearing saying that we're not trained, I don't know how they know that. Yes, I actually am trained in DEI. That's just one aspect of it. But I'm not going to sit here and go through my resume or the resume of other individuals who are on the committee. To me, that's just not doing homework or just saying things without fully knowing the picture. I guess what I want you guys to think about is that this impacts people's lives. Lives you might not see, you might hear about. But unless the work is done, unless we do it with a heart that we care about every student, and we don't get bombarded by all the rhetoric, all the people who are complaining, all the people who have a problem. Because what Nia said, what are people afraid of? I don't understand that, especially when you sit in the majority. What are you afraid of? So I just wanted to express myself. Like I said, I know this is hard work, and there's going to be a lot of challenges, but you can't do this on your own. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Laura Laura Ostrander.
Yeah, Laura Ostrander, thank you. Hey there. I also was not going to speak. I am a teacher in the district. I also sat on the DEI committee. It was a pleasure working with many of my DEI colleagues at the time. And I think I want to sit and speak to a couple of things. I know that this work is hard. I watch your board meetings. I know that you guys are here for hours. And I think when I watched the ad hoc be dissolved, I was okay because I understood that, you know, we're in a process, we're at an evolutionary place and we have to figure out some next steps, and that was okay. There was a couple pieces that I took away from that meeting that stuck out to me. One, a comment made that we lacked focus. And we had 20-some people, strangers, getting together that didn't know each other, working on a very wide end vision. And we had to sort of frame that out to what we wanted to accomplish. And I think that to come to a table in a very professional way around a very emotional topic about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we did it in a very methodical way to find a possible audit process. You know, we could sit and we could look at all of the different types and why not it was okay. But really our end goal was not to make all the decisions that the district was going to do, but really look thoroughly at where we were as a district with as much data as we could to make informed recommendations that somebody else could sort of see down the line. And that's kind of what we were tasked to do. So to me, I call that focus. So the other thing that this is what made me stand up tonight. That same night when it was dismantled, the idea that we had somehow had too much emotion around the table. And I've heard the comments a couple times about a co-chair, a very, very professional co-chair that was a leader and stepped into a role without necessarily being asked to, mentioned on one occasion off of the meeting that things felt hateful. And I kept questioning myself. We often speak to emotions and how things feel to us. That is opinion and that is a feeling. And so why did it keep coming back to this co-chair feeling hate? Instead of thinking that person has too much emotion, why don't we step back and wonder why that person might be experiencing that emotion in our community? And why does it bother us that they name it as hateful? I would want to know more about why that person doesn't belong than why they would name our community as hateful. And I think therein lies why this work is very important, because we have to get to understand that there are different views. This work is emotional. Board work is emotional. And for anybody to be set to task because they experience an emotion on a highly emotional topic is very unfair. And so those two things kind of stood out. Moving forward, I fully agree that we need community engagement. I would have loved to have seen the stakeholders of the ad hoc stay present because we had phenomenal work going. We could have added to that. We could have added more perspectives. We could have added more board members. The community dialogue was something that came up around our table and said, this isn't just a public speaking. This does nothing. We have no two-way dialogue. You hear me, but we don't hear each other. And so had we, as a ad hoc, had opportunities to have face-to-face conversation with people in the community, we could have lifted this work together. Instead, it was kind of replaced where we're starting by scratch because the next version may be better than we were. And that's okay. But again, why? We could have just added to it. Okay, on that, I just really feel strongly about this work. I feel like we have to hear each other. I think people from all perspectives are struggling to hear each other. And we have to do something different. We have to continue the work. We have to come to the table. We have to stay in it, even if emotions are high, even if we disagree. Because our kids matter. It is existing in our district, in our entire world. And
we have to do better than what our current adult population is doing if we want our kids to come out with better ability to navigate their lives moving forward. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. That ends the public comments that I have received. I do want to thank you each for the comments that you made. It is, I mean, we are trying to find our way and navigate through this, and I do appreciate hearing all sides of the comments. So at our last meeting, we began with the audit, and a direction that we felt necessary was to kind of send it back to our administration and have them begin to look through and maybe divvy up some of the items in that audit to standing committees that we already have. So Tim is going to kind of report on that process. He and Randy Gutenberg primarily sat down and did that over a couple of meetings. So Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you for a few minutes and then we will jump in and look through this.
Okay, thank you, Joan.
You are welcome.
And Rebecca, if you could bring it up, we're not going to go through it line by line, but you know, Randy and I talked about this several times, and we had 2 meetings, he and I, that were specifically focused on this document and trying to think about our existing committee structure, what work could flow into that, what work did not have, or what recommendations did not have, in our opinion, an easy match for the existing committee structure. There were some places where we had some different ideas about where it could go or uncertainties, and we've reflected those in the notes. But as we looked at it, we felt that many of the audit's recommendations from the advisory committee could match the scope of existing board committees. And then that there would be others that would need to go someplace else. Now, whether that would be this group or a group created by this group, that's ultimately, you know, the board's decision. But our thinking was that depending on how you as a committee you know, evaluate our recommendations here, that, for example, if there are 6 of these, and I'm just, you know, throwing a number out there that would go to the HR committee, the Human Resources Committee, then the charge would be for the HR committee sometime in their next few meetings to review those, you know, prioritize those, and kind of report back to the full board, you know, what was feasible. Because, you know, we haven't had an audit like this. It is, you know, fairly comprehensive. There are a lot of recommendations in here. Some of our committees have, you know, existing bodies of work, so there would need to be priorities. And I think, you know, for the full board and for the community, it'd be important for each committee to report back, you know, what are the things that we can set priorities on, and what are the things that might be, you know, 6 months out, later, you know, so on and so forth. In terms of areas that, as Randy and I looked at it, you'll see the term new committee. Those really fell into 2 categories. One was the topic that, you know, we really feel is one of our most pressing topics, if not the most pressing topic, which is the student climate, the student sense of belonging in our schools. And we feel that that didn't have a natural home with any of our standing committees and could be a good fit for an additional body. The other piece that's in these recommendations that is parallel to that are recommendations in the areas of community engagement. And you know, as Randy and I were talking about it, that could also be something that could get charged to an additional body, or it could get charged to the board as a whole. But community engagement is one of the priority areas on the strategic planning framework. I know it's something you as a board have spent some time considering, and there's some recommendations in here specifically in that realm. I would add, as you look at the document, we did receive an email from a community member today who had compared this document with the report, the audit report from the advisory committee, and noticed that there was one section, there's one recommendation that hadn't been enumerated, it led with a finally, that's how we missed it. And that didn't make it to the document, but it was, as the district expands professional development opportunities for staff, the committee recommends the district document and evaluate the impact of professional learning by collecting data with regard to student belonging and achievement. So that's not in this document, but were it to be in this document, we would see that really being in the PD space as being something that would probably be assigned to the curriculum committee. So I don't know if, with that kind of intro, if you want to go through this line by line, if you'd like me, Joan, to kind of walk through this more.
Well, I think I'd like to kind of reach out to the committee. When I went through it a number of times and looked at the committees that you were assigned, and the large scope of it all. And would it be beneficial for us to take one or two of these categories and kind of maybe focus in instead of the whole document? We can go through the whole document and through the committee assignments, but again, I think that that's a lot to give any of our committees the number of items that are possibly assigned to curriculum or to policy. So Jack?
Yeah, I think when you look at some of these things, like number 3, encourage the board to revisit time horizon before advisors can be compensated. One of the things that we asked administration to do is put together a 3-year plan, from a budget standpoint, and present that in January. Some of these things can, are budgetary in nature, and those should be part of that plan. If this is important, then what we should be doing is, making sure that there's, from a financial standpoint, we can start looking at these further. I think, when you look at the engagement, I think one of the things that we talked about last time is having these listening sessions, between each one of the groups, parents, teachers, students, and administration. Each one of those comes at this problem or situation with a different attitude, with a different lens. We ask the same questions to each one of them. And I think what that also does is it starts to identify trends that we can take off. A lot of these things here, they're broad, right? So, these have to be, broken down into smaller chunks. I agree with you, John. These things are big chunks, and somehow we got to break them down into smaller pieces so that we can.
Well, what I was looking at, Jack, is just the heading of the categories. There's, I think, 5 or 6 categories in here. The first one being to foster a positive climate for teaching for our students and our staff.
What does that mean?
Well, they have kind of built out some items in there. And I do think, back to your listening sessions, I think that it would be good to engage with our students. But I think we have to narrow the focus. I mean, personally, I just feel that we need to kind of look at a couple of these categories and narrow down instead of the whole document.
I would agree with that.
So, we heard that evening with the community engagement, we really heard a lot from students. And, I think personally, I'd really like to focus in our student experiences and look at what could we do to create a more positive, inclusive atmosphere for many of our students,
What's the last part?
for our students.
Yes. I think that should be our first priority. And in fact, I think that's why really the board started looking at this thing. And I think this is a great roadmap.
Yeah.
It may not be a one-year roadmap, and so I would agree with Joan. I think the starting place would be on looking at this and pulling out what things apply to our students right now and focus on those. And we can have some backup ones for seconds, for us to move forward, but see how much of a chunk that is.
Mhm.
If I could just add something in, and I think Jack alluded to this partly, is that, some of these items in here would actually require some direct work by the board. So if you have a policy change, we're going to develop it for you, but ultimately you're going to have to decide what the policy change looks like. Others of these are actually things where the majority of the work is going to happen with staff or staff working with students, parents, et cetera, and then the role of the board committees to provide oversight. So for those efforts. And so, as Randy and I were thinking about it, we feel a lot of good thinking went into the audit report. We felt, as you did, Mark, that there's a lot in here, and as you do, Joan, and this is probably not the work of 1 year, but if it go to each committee, and each committee could work with the administrators who work most closely with that committee to kind of assess that bundle, both in terms of prioritization and in terms of what would actually require board work at committee meetings and what would really be work by others that the committee would provide some oversight on. That would be a good first step of the items that would go to standing committees. And then there would still be the question, and a lot of these items are in that area of the student belonging and the student climate. What does that engagement process look like, and how do we, implement some pieces to create a better school environment? How do we track our progress, and how do we listen to families and students to see if they make it?
Then how do you, I'm sorry,
ahead.
how do you, we're doing climate studies all the time. So we're engaging and so forth. How do you do those now? And what are you finding in those climate studies?
Well, what we've seen historically, when we've had surveys that have asked students different types of engagement questions, whether it's been a senior exit survey, a school climate survey, Dane County youth assessment, you'll see, there's some standard questions. You feel you have an adult that you can go to if you have a problem in the school. Do you feel safe in school? And there's a set of common questions that have been kind of developed over time that work in that space. And every time we do that, we see that we don't always have high levels on that. And we see that responses where we collect demographic data, which we have not been doing on all of our surveys, we find there's sometimes there are differences, by gender. differences by race, differences based on other characteristics. So I think the key thing is we need to create a consistent, even if we don't have always the same instrument, we have to have some same items on these instruments instead of different questions asked at different times. Otherwise, it's very difficult to track your progress when you're using different measurements. We've been made aware through the National Equity Project of an assessment called Elevate that has been developed by a set of researchers that work in the school improvement space. It tackles a lot of questions, not only student belonging, but it also looks at kind of the academic climate in the classrooms, growth mindset, but it also talks about, do I feel safe and respected? That's the kind of assessment that over time, once we develop staff comfort with that assessment, which is important, we could potentially build that out more and collect more data.
Tim, one item that is in that category is the reporting.
Yes.
tool. Where's that one?
So we're waiting for that to be approved by the board. It's going to go to curriculum committee Thursday. And if the reception's positive there, or if the modifications suggested are very limited, then we could see that at the December, I think it's December 13th is our regular meeting.
And once you have that tool, when you designed the tool, did you also design how the response would be if somebody used, like, who responds? Is that part of the process, or then will it?
Yeah, it's part of the process. That's a great question. And so we would use the Qualtrics platform, which we use for other pieces. And I think, maybe the closest analogy, although for a very different purpose, is back last year during the pandemic. Staff every morning, I had to do it, Rebecca had to do it. We would wake up in the morning, we would have a Qualtrics survey that was emailed to us. Am I feeling fine? It had a set of questions, the symptom questions. And then if we flagged on anything, it would push an email to our supervisor, and it would push an email to Brian Grabarsky in HR. So what this reporting tool would do would be something very similar. If there was a report, you indicate what location it happens, and then a push notification, an email would go to some of the building leadership at that school, and then someone over here at Bethel Circle. And there's disclaimer language at the beginning. If this is an emergency, this is not the form for that. 911's your form, is your means of communication. And then, we would look at this within the next business day.
And this tool they would access just on the website?
It could be on the website. We can potentially put up QR codes that students could scan, and then it would bring up the form on a device that had some kind of recognition for a QR code. And again, it's another channel. It's meant to complement existing forms of reporting. I mean, if somebody experiences something in class, they should talk to their teacher or a responsible adult. If a community member has a concern, it doesn't mean you can't email or call somebody connected to the schools anymore, but it's creating another avenue to try to make sure we're being complete in understanding what's going on as possible.
Tim, my concern, it asks for the anonymous tipster that something's not right, which alerts us to a problem internally. So an actual victim of this who wants to report it and resolve it, they go by the current policy, correct?
So if you could, if you wanted to provide identifying information.
Well, the thing is, if I've been racially attacked, verbally, physically, that's not going to help me. that's just gonna let you know there's a problem. And so when I was preparing for tonight, I found we have 7 different policies that deal with issues linked to discrimination, harassment of all sorts. And there is a form to fill out. How often are students and staff made aware of this process? Because it's not an easy process. And some of it was very potentially contradictory, if you want, in some situations. I mean, looking at volumes of verbiage, and a teenager doesn't need that. They need something simple, and they need to know. I know when I taught, we never told the people where to go if you're having problems with these things. I'm even wondering if the complaint form is available, readily available in our schools.
So the answer to that is, first, any of these reporting tools are not in and of themselves the total solution to the
Right.
problem. They are a contributing factor towards a solution. Those reporting forms are available on request. We don't, if you go to the right spot on the website, you can find out how to ask
Have
about
they
it.
been told that?
I think the answer is the exposure to that information is very limited. It will happen at beginning of the year training, and it will happen in student handbooks. And that's really where it is. And that's true actually of a lot of information. I mean, I had a mother ask me a few weeks ago why her son had received a text from a military recruiter. And, by federal law, we have to provide, unless the parent does a specific kind of opt-out, and they have to do it every year in a certain way, it's in the student handbook. But if you don't notice that and you don't do that, then the information shared, and that's what will happen. So I mean, I think these are very important questions, Mark, and there are a lot of things that are really very relevant to students that right now only come out through some of these annual notices or when you sign off on your handbook at the start of the year.
I wonder how many people actually read the handbook in detail.
Not
Yeah.
many.
They sign off on it, get it back to you, and then a lot of the information is there, in the handbook. But because we go year after year with minimal changes, but I think to your point, Mark, you got 7 different policies. Is there a way that we can give that to the policy committee to say, is there a way we can simplify things? So that, you could probably use one form for,
Or
if
create
you-
a policy that synthesizes report in all 7 areas.
Yeah, so you probably use the same form and have different check marks so that it solves a different.
And identify
situation.
the process so students know they don't have to spend hours trying to figure it out.
And that's one reason in here why you see recommendations on community engagement, because you have question, if somebody comes to me and says, did you share your information about FERPA? Did you share your information about my right to refer a child for a disability? Did I share what to do with a discrimination complaint? Did I make you aware of disclosures of information, for military recruiters, which we're happy to provide. It's our obligation under the law, but there's also a notification that goes to parents. And we can always say, yes, we did. But just because something's in the handbook, as we all know, that doesn't mean it's absorbed in detail. So I mean, I think there's a whole set of questions around engagement and how do we kind of highlight kind of your must-haves to students and families that, again, as we can see from kind of the scope of this discussion, this is a big topic in and of itself. And we've got a lot of these on here tonight.
That's why we're giving it to the policy committee. To,
Well,
I'm kidding, Joe.
yeah, I mean, we just need to have an avenue for kids to report, so they know what they, I mean, they know how to do it, what the expectation is, and then who's going to respond.
But I think the other challenge is they come in September. You tell them how all of this stuff works. And then it doesn't happen until February. And you've got a lot of water over the dam that, geez, you know, what, you know.
I think you can promote some of that with signage at school as a constant reminder.
That's the concept. And then if you add the QR code to the signage, it can close the
Yeah.
loop right there.
Can this program that you're talking, or this app that you're talking about, digitize some of these forms? You know, from the standpoint of getting the same information that these forms provide.
So I mean, I think the answer to that is yes. And again, you know, I'll harken back to my example from last year. If you were a parent and you were sending your child to school, the school had to come in with their slip. And that was you know, we had the paper forms made, just because the idea of doing the email thing, you know, but for staff, very similar information was gathered, but electronically. So as in all parts of our operation, there are always opportunities to find modern conveniences through digitization. I just, you know, again, I feel like these are great questions, but those are the kinds of detailed questions that, you know, as a path forward is charted, that would go, you know, to a committee, whether it's a standing committee or some new body to make progress on in more detail and get into place.
So, Tim, as I look through this, if we focus in tonight on just maybe just the first bullet point, is it helpful that we affirm or confirm the committees that you chose? Would that be helpful?
I think it would to have momentum. I mean, Randy and I, you know, these are recommendations. We put some time into them. But, you know, if you, you know, feel like something doesn't quite land right and you want to kind of put it someplace else, you know, we intended these as recommendations, but we do feel we could take a big step tonight if we determine what goes to standing committees and then what do we mean by going to a standing committee? Because there's significant recommendations here, and what would go into a different body, whether that was this body or a different body that you create. That's, you know, that's downstream from this. But I think the discussion at the last meeting was, until there's some general idea about how to parcel it out, you'd want to do that before you considered the composition of anything beyond our standing committees. That's how Randy and I interpreted last week's discussion.
So,
I would still submit, you know, I think you guys did a great job kind of parsing this out, the committees. But I think this information could be used in the listening sessions. You know, that, you know, this is where we're thinking about putting this work, because these are the people that are dealing with it on a regular basis. Or these are the committees that are responsible for dealing with it. I think one of the things that we've got to do is really set those listening sessions. You know, so that we can get that input as well. But if you want to go through, you know, where you guys have kind of put these committees, you know, we can do that as well.
I think we have to come out with more than just dialogue tonight. I think we should have, you know, some of this plan for what we see as immediate and go forward with it. I'd even submit that we should have our committees solidified before we leave, knowing that we can expand it if we want to. I think the public needs to hear that. I think they need to hear what specifically are you doing besides talking about it. And so that's what I would like to do tonight, get some of that work done. So if we want to start with this, then we go to the committee. I'm open to anything, but I think we need to get moving.
Start with, what do you want to start with, Mark?
Either prioritizing off this list, because this
Okay.
takes the 7 focus points.
Yep.
Which ones we think are, let's do now and who does them. And then I do think we need to address our committee membership before we leave tonight somehow.
Okay, so should we just go through the list that they have started and agree or disagree with the committee that they put it up? Okay. So in that first category, comments on where we put.
So Tim, when you put the new committee, does that refer to us or does that refer to a 3rd committee and a 4th committee and 5th committee?
So that would, when we put new committee in there, that referred to, in our minds, perhaps we shouldn't have called it the new committee, not a standing committee. So it could be this committee, or it could be, depending on kind of how your committee decided to proceed, some other non-standing committee.
Okay. So I actually saw 2 and 4 as falling under the guise of DEI.
Yeah, I did too. So,
And number 3 is the HR, I would assume.
Yep.
You want to,
Yeah, if you could, if we're done with the first page.
I think these things are appropriate towards the committees you identified.
so Tim, is curriculum really in charge of PD?
So I don't think we have a committee per se that's in charge of PD, but when we provided reports, so there'll be some things where we'll invite the whole board to staff development days. But I mean, from time to time, we've brought reports back to curriculum committee. Historically, curriculum committee, I don't think has gotten really too into the weeds on PD, but from an oversight perspective, it seemed to us the logical place to land. And then the next page is all policy as we saw it.
So should we limit that focus to those 7? Or or have I missed some? I'm looking at board policy 310, instructional goals, 411, equal educational activities, 411, rule 1, student discrimination, harassment procedure, complaint procedure, rule 2, 405, complaint procedure, 411, harassment complaint form, policy 412, sexual harassment, and 413, discrimination on the basis of sex and educational programs. Some of them are replicated in the 500s for staff, I believe.
So I think the one thing, in kind of thinking about this, I think in terms of the actual policies that would match kind of Randy's understanding and my understanding, Mark. There are some pieces in here that do talk about our student handbooks though, and some of what we have around behavior practices are often reflected in the handbooks. Now typically we haven't made a lot of changes to the student handbooks. I think the change to the high school dress code 3 years ago is the most significant change. They usually come to the full board with small modifications through 2 readings you know, late spring, early summer. I think the question is, we thought about it though, if we were really going to have a committee that was going to supervise a deeper review at the board level of the handbooks, or hear or kind of provide oversight on a staff review of same, it seemed to us that that might fall under policy, even though that wouldn't be policies. So that's kind of the only thing I want to kind of highlight in there in our thinking. That might be different than what you were expecting.
Oh, isn't it true too that the handbooks are edited by building administrators? So you can get a different flavor when you're
Yes.
building.
I didn't know, I didn't feel 2, 3, or 4 would be our board policy committee, because we don't have policy around behavior
It's
and
from the board book.
what,
This, you said we don't have?
we don't have policies. Our general policies, we don't have policies around student behavior in our board policies. Those are all building policies
In the handbooks.
in the handbook.
Right, right.
So, yeah, I didn't know if they should go to the policy committee, because that's not really the policy committee that works.
Would that be more administrative?
Yeah, it's typically not. And I guess, you know, our thinking was, you know, this is exactly why we say these are recommendations. You know, the policy handbooks go through 2 readings. Those are big handbooks. You know, we have an elementary handbook, we have middle school handbook, we have a high school handbook. And I guess the question is, when they come to the board in a full meeting, you know, you're all really diligent, but in a full meeting, you have many agenda items in that packet. Now, the way we've done our handbooks, they tend to have minimal changes from year to year. But if we were to do more thoroughgoing changes, is running it through the full board without some prior review by a committee the best way to get the kind of engagement that we think you might want in that process?
I think this is good, you know, having the policy committee kind of vet some of this stuff out. I think the way you've laid it out here is fine. You know, because then it can come to the full board and it's already been, you know, vetted by, you know, the committee members. And then if there's some discussion at the board level, take it at the board level as well.
Well,
So the
reflecting to what
administrators-
Joan and Tim were just saying though, I'm not sure the handbook should go to the board policy committee. One, they're gonna have enough work with these to go through. I don't know if that should come to us or a new committee.
Yeah, I felt it should come here.
Yeah,
I think that's part of our
that's,
review.
that's what I was
is
thinking.
To look at some of those are things that directly affect our students. And I think that that's our focus, is to review some of those practices and look at some of those handbook issues, if that's where they're listed. I'd like to keep 2 through 4 kind of in our committee.
Yes.
But one thing we need is what the current behavior practices. You know, we almost need a report from the building principals. Or we could go visit them. I mean, I don't know what the current behavior practices are for dealing with discipline.
So Joan, what are you doing with one? 2 through 4 come to this committee. What do you do with one?
What do we do with them?
Where does that go? Is that part of this committee?
Yeah.
Well,
2,
2 through
3,
4
and
going to the
4.
policy committee.
2 through 4 come to us, the DEI committee. What happens to them?
You could split it and keep the language in the Board of Education policies, the policy committee,
And the
and the
rest should,
language in the handbooks. are the
Right.
different body.
I think the handbook stuff, I think we should review that. We
Yeah.
should get some input from students, administrators. That should be part
And
of our
link
deal.
that update language to 2, 3, and 4, right?
When do handbooks generally need revisions for the next year? As we're talking about this, what kind of timeline do you need?
I think it depends on the scope and how much input you want. So, you know, the elementary principals, last year meant to do some tweaks to the handbooks. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how much was highlighted before they came before you, but that was very much an administrative process. 3 years ago, a year before the pandemic, the high school probably spent a year to 15 months working on the dress code revision, which is just a section of the handbook. But that involved multiple staff meetings. It involved a few cycles through the high school pack. It involved a lot of student input. And again, that was just a small but very important part, students, part of the handbook. So,
So it's a process.
right, and I think a key point is the high school updated their dress code section, and that was independent, and this speaks, you know, to what we were talking about earlier. The handbooks are not necessarily aligned. And so the high school made a change to their dress code, and if you were to look at the middle school dress code and the high school dress code, there'd be discrepancies. So it might not all happen in 1 year, Joe, but I mean, I think to kind of take this lens to our handbooks and say, you know, what are some areas that we should be looking at, and then what kind of engagement needs to happen to come up with these changes, is going to kind of determine the answer of what can be done for next year, what can be done for 2 years from now.
Okay.
So for this year, I think we've given the policy enough. Yes. Which takes us to curriculum.
Oh, we have a couple more items. in this one.
I'm sorry, oh, there we are. Yep, I'm sorry. So is this sort of a end of the year report we're looking at? Is that the sense with 5 and 6?
Well,
6 is reporting anonymously that we're going to see
yeah.
at our next curriculum meeting.
So let me, from my perspective, you know, the context I would put 5 in, I'm going to go back to the high school adjustments to the dress code 3 years ago. Those were very sweeping. And the high school, I think, has something that reflects a lot of input. It's very up to date. I have been in meetings with students where, and again, in fairness to the students with the pandemic, they haven't been quite in regular school, some of them until this year. But the gap between what was in the handbook and what students thought was in the handbook for dress code was noticeable. Now, is that attributable to what we talked about earlier, not always being fully aware of what's in the handbook? Was it due to differences in practice in the handbook from what was actually happening in the halls of classrooms? Or was it just because the kids had been in irregular schooling with the pandemic enough that they just haven't lived the changes? I couldn't tell you, but that's kind of, I think, you know, you have changes on paper, but then is that actually what is the ground truth? That's kind of, I think, where 5 is getting at.
Right.
And then 6 is for everything. This is not just, I mean, this references the reporting system, but if we do it, we would really, I think, want to bring in everything that we had reports in. And of course, it'd have to be in a very summary way that would be not identifying and protect individuals' privacies, but how many, I mean, you get, as a board, there are some reports that you're required to receive under state law. So Kurt before and now Tiffany comes in and they provide you with that report on seclusion and restraint, and it's an annual thing. The concept here under 6 is just what kind of behavior events are happening in our schools? How many times do we have somebody sent home because they were wearing something inappropriate that, you know, violated provisions of our dress code? Or how many, you know, the kind of thing that Mia was referring to, you know, does that happen in our schools? And if so, how many incidents of that type, whether it's reported through the reporting system or somebody going to a teacher, how much did that happen last year? Right now, we don't bring that all together in one place. And I think that would be very useful for the community to know. And quite frankly, it'd be very helpful for us from a continuous improvement standpoint too.
So do you think that falls more to us or to the committee?
I think that falls to administration, where, you know, if these reports are coming together, you know, administration somehow has to collect them.
It's a good point.
You know, so, you know, you get PBIS, you get, you know, this new reporting thing, tool that you get paper reports. Somehow that's got to come to a centralized location and somebody's got to be looking.
Yep.
And I would assume that's in student services someplace.
It happens to a degree already. So, I mean, in the schools, you have teams that do look at our behavioral data, you know, and so they will look at certain patterns in the data and use that to kind of update interventions and also the teaching, but above the building level, it's not aggregated. Yeah.
But it seems like you could do that, some type of standardized reporting. I know the PBIS, you tried to, we've been using that for what, 5 years now, 10 years. And it was a matter of getting a common language so that everybody knew at every building what something meant. And I would assume that we've got that pretty well under control now, that, you know, if you're getting that information from all of the buildings, you know, you can put your incident report together. And I would submit that's administration and supply like a annual report.
Yeah, that should just be reported.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's,
That it necessarily needs a committee. It needs to come to the full board.
yeah, I think it comes to the full board or this committee and develop a plan for communicating and monitoring fidelity of practice with regards to policy. That kind of falls into this, right? That kind of leads in. So both of those are more reporting than new committee. Right?
So this is where the 7th item is going, right? Kim, that was-
Yes, which would be, you know, for the professional development, how do we, you know, look at indicators of student belonging and student achievement to see if over time we are seeing improvements that we would hope to see based on the professional development opportunities we're providing.
And you might do that through some type of.
So ideas of student belonging would be a survey instrument. And then student achievement, we do get student achievement reports. You've been receiving them over the last few meetings and we're going to, you know, report on. I mean, the concept there, I think, is that you'd see, to the extent that there are gaps in outcomes, that you would hope to see improved performance where we had seen room for improvement over time.
Okay. So moving on to the second category.
Again,
So-
no, I'm sorry, Joe. go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, this whole section from the committee was really focused on curriculum, so that's,
Right.
it made it, it seemed very straightforward to take each of these items and put them under the umbrella of the curriculum committee for oversight.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Um, Now, I'd like to pause. Should we continue to go through the full
Please
document?
say that louder, please.
Should we go through the whole document and sub it out? You know,
We've got a lot of work just here that we've come.
right.
Yep.
Should we, that next category, I had so many questions on
I
what it all meant and,
think this is a great starting point.
I think maybe these first two categories at this point may be.
What I would say is there may be some items further on, I'll just kind of pull this as an example, under capable qualified educators, number 4 is educators rising. That's a conversation Michelle McGlynn and I have had in the past that we would explore at some point in the future. So, that's something that we would probably kind of re-explore organically, regardless of whether that item was placed. There was a.
So which one is that, Tim? I'm sorry.
Under kind of the HR section, that all students have access to capable qualified educators.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
yeah,
something
yeah.
that the WTA has also expressed an interest in really helping us move on, which is Educators Rising is an opportunity for high school students who are interested in pursuing a career in education. One to be in kind of a CTSO, kind of like your FFA and DECA and Skills USA, but also to have potentially some coursework at the high school that could be articulated and begin to satisfy some of their collegiate requirements for that major. And I'm not trying to say this is more important than anything else, but it's
But
an item that we'd had some preliminary discussions before internally, and it's something I could see naturally happening, whether you
yeah,
assign the rest of this for a committee in the near term or not.
well, and I do think some of the HR items here are things that and I know Brian is looking at some other places to post openings to get, possibly different candidates. So I know that he's kind of in that realm already.
I might suggest the next page is pretty much of equal value, and that is something that could be done immediately versus waiting until next year. But I am concerned that if we throw too much on too many people, we're not going to get done with it.
The curriculum things, Mark. you
Oh.
think you know?
I tend to agree with that. We can only put on so much work. And I think we've loaded some of these people up already.
Well, and I like the focus that, that first category is primarily on the student climate, and I think that that's a good place to start. And that's kind of what we heard, and
So what are the next steps here?
Mark, you had some other items that you wanted to do.
So whatever we haven't covered, we'll address in the future to be determined.
Yes,
Okay,
the items on
that
the,
makes sense.
yes.
Okay. Well, I thought we need to address the committee membership before we leave tonight. If for nothing other, to let the public know what is and what isn't. We had some discussion the last time that looked at both limiting, as some people suggested, the 3 board members to a more expanded but smaller number than the original DEI. And then a third permutation of that with even more representation in terms of numbers. From my own perspective, I've been leaning into less is more and looking at a smaller group. But I do recognize by keeping it as a 3-member group, part of the community has a concern about non-elected people making policies. And I think that's a valid concern. I do think if we were to go to just the 3 board members on the subcommittee, there are meetings where we could invite people to the table for discussion. For example, when we're looking at some of the student reporting things, we could have students come in and work with us and tell us what's working, what's not working. The handbook's an example where we could have asked for students to come work with us to look for recommendations for improvement. And to me, there's an unlimited number of those opportunities, plus the engagement meetings that Dave was talking about. So, I'm sorry. Blame it on my stuff, my notes.
So keeping the committee at 3, but including more people at the table for topics.
I agree, keeping it at 3, and I think there's ways of getting the information. Again, the engagement meetings, if we have specific topics that we want to go out there and get information, anybody in the community can address. And those engagement can be dialogue. They don't have to be a formal, you sit at this table, talk to us, and we listen for an hour and a half. It should be more of a dialogue so that we can create conversation. And I think the challenge, if you go and put another committee together, it's how do we pick those people? And if you pick that certain person, then this guy over here says, it's not right.
And there's no way it's going to be represented anyways. If you have 4 parents, does that truly reflect the whole community? It's kind of a.
But you've given the whole community the opportunity.
If you do the engagement pieces.
That's right. So if you have 4 people showing up in the engagement meetings and they're providing their input, you're giving the entire community an opportunity to come and talk about it. So I like that way.
I really feel we need engagement and feedback from different segments. I agree there are many challenges to putting people on a committee permanently. And I think some of the topics people will have more interest in than others. When we talk about student experiences, I think we need to talk to students and talk to parents and talk to key people in our buildings that have heard those stories and can give us that information. So, I agree. I think the membership around the table can change and that the voting members stay the board. But I would like to make a plan of how we have that greater voice. And maybe we just pick a topic and,
Yeah. I don't know if we can do it tonight, if we need to get some thought to it, but definitely, for example, the handbook is something I like to hear from the students, maybe the teachers on it too. As teachers, administrators. There are other issues that I think need to go to the general public. And that might be something we identify at the next meeting, so we can get it announced ahead of time. I would propose that we also be looking at when we're going to do the, that's sort of a public engagement, some of this information gathering, but setting dates for those things so we can target it and be ready for it.
Well, I think we're going into the holiday season now. I think what we probably should look at is in January.
Dave would like to make a comment.
I think this is a bad idea. We have done the board committee meetings saying how to do this stuff for decades. And we're still dealing with this problem. If you want to truly change the climate for students, you have to let them help you because they are the climate. Their life is the climate. We can't do that by one-shot engagements. We can't do that by invite them in to have them talk openly with us. You have to build that trust. Being on the DEI committee and watching it work over months, and I really encourage you to go back and watch the meetings. And the one thing to look for is how much the students were engaged. They were more engaged by the end than they were at the beginning. At the beginning, they didn't speak for meetings. They sat there. Why? Because they didn't know their voice. They didn't feel safe to speak their full voice. They gained that over time. If you invite them in for a single meeting, hardly anybody's going to show up at best. And
We
even
wouldn't
if they
invite them
do,
here, Dave, we'd go to them.
it doesn't matter. It's a one-shot meeting. I mean, we
Well,
were
there'd
starting
be
to have
more than
four-
two voices. There'd be as many as wanted to come to our meeting. You had two student voices.
you should have more than two. We have several student groups that work on this inside the high school. That try to do it, that they formed on their own. Those people should be part of this committee. Those groups should be part of this committee because they were doing it before we were. And if we want them to be open and trusting of us, you have to build that relationship. You don't do it by walking in the room one time. You don't do it by walking in the room twice. You do it over months. You do it over a year. And if you really want them to open up and speak, we had two students this time who volunteered to be on the committee, and they were quiet for months because they didn't have that level of trust. They didn't have that level of self-confidence within the committee to really be able to open up. And they did later. And again, I encourage you to go back and watch the meetings, and you'll see that. And if we want to change that culture, if we want them to fully engage with us, we have to fully engage with them, not little invitations or not one-shot show-ups. That's not going to build that trust. That's not going to change that climate and atmosphere of how students see the board, administration, or whatever you want to call it. You have to let them be equal members. And I think that's where you get to that level of truly letting them be part of it and truly letting them fully experience and give you their experience.
Dave, do you think having two members gave the large student voice? I mean, did they go out and solicit experiences? And do you think having two people on the committee, and I agree with what you said, I mean, comfort level is built and trust is built, and I agree with all that, but my concern is selecting two people. You know, there's a lot of criticism. How do you do that? And how do you select two people that will really represent the whole group and bring that voice of the whole group together?
That's why I said you don't select two. you let the Social Justice League, you let the GSA, you let the Black Student Union, you let the conservative group, you let the Christian athlete group, all pick a person and send it. Just like we have the 2 reps who come to the school board. We don't select those people. They select them. Let them select those people. I mean, I see this committee as not just a one-way listening session for us to help us set board policy. I mean, trying to do that to some degree anyway. And you're right, in that sense, that's all you would do. I see this committee over time really helping the students create a 2-way communication that helps change the climate. I mean, board policy doesn't change the climate in the high school. Go ahead, set every rule you want. It's not
I
going to do a
agree.
thing.
I agree.
I disagree. My vision is that in 2 years, this subcommittee is an oversight committee only. That the actual work is being done in each of the schools.
Then you don't
That's where the
understand
work has
fact
to
that the
happen, not
students
through the
change
board.
constantly.
It has to happen internally at each school. And as a board, we set policy, we don't administrate. That's not our job. We don't administrate, we don't investigate. Our job is to make policy that does these things. And that's what I think we're trying to do. And the nexus of the growth or what we hope to happen culturally has got to be within each school, not with the school board.
It's about us helping foster it.
Well, I
Just-
think that we're trying to help foster it. You know, I think you've got a way, every one of us has a different way of fostering this, right? And what we've got to do is come to consensus. You know, I think we've come as a committee to some type of consensus to move this forward.
Ted,
Talked a while ago, but
Ted, I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
So I'm still trying to, what's this committee going to do, this subcommittee made up of all these people? They don't have any power to do anything. They're just gonna present stuff to someone that's going to Mark's point, we're the ones that make policy. They're gonna present that. So I'm still going back to, why don't those groups you mentioned, they're still gonna get together. They're still gonna do those things. And they're gonna bring that information to this committee, this 3-member committee. I don't know how that changes. I don't know how bringing all of these people in to do what? I guess I'm not understanding.
It's the concept of empowerment.
Empowering how? What? They don't have any ability to do anything, no? They're just gonna be involved talking about stuff.
Well, tell them they are less. Tell them that they will have less involvement, not make them feel better.
No, they won't have any ability to do anything anyway, because it's still gonna go to 3 members to make a recommendation to the full board.
And that's what I'm saying. They should be making the recommendation, just like this. You saw a list of things that this committee came up with after 19 meetings and over a year. And we have several members, and I'll admit myself, I don't understand the details of every point of it. But you know what? Those people on that committee who didn't have the empowerment, who didn't have the ability to enact those policies, spent the time to research and write it up so that we can. That's where
That
you get
committee is
what's
gonna
going.
be, in a sense, then sort of in a vacuum, that it'll come, because they'll be all doing that, and they'll come to the board and they'll get shot down this time after this time or this time, and then we'll just get so upset that it's like, why aren't they doing anything that we're recommending?
Well, hopefully the board won't shoot it down.
Well,
That's not the idea.
well, of course, it's not the idea, but if it were to happen that way, whoa, wait a minute, this is all set up wrong. We don't have any ability to do anything, so it isn't even working out
And we did that by dissolving
by dissolving.
the committee.
We didn't.
If you want to empower, if you want to change the climate for everybody who doesn't have, you're right, they don't have the ability to walk in here and vote and say, I'm going to change the high school and here's how. They don't. But you empower them by giving them a voice and a direct way to have input into it. You don't do that by saying, well, once every so often we'll talk to you, then after 2 years, we may not even do that.
And I guess I don't see how this is eliminating it, because maybe there's another group that comes along. They're gonna provide the same amount of input. There'll be a whole nother one that offshoots. They all have to be able to speak to that. I mean, you want it open to everyone. Don't limit it to whatever you see right now is on the table. There'll be another one in 6 months.
You know, I hear what you're saying, Dave, and I hear what you're saying, Ted. I think at this point, we're settling in on, we want to hear those voices, but I get that you've got to hear more than once. For example, you know, something that came to me is maybe we need to go as a committee and have, you know, a table and have maybe monthly lunchtime availability to hear these people and have it advertised, but it's got to be repeated. I get that. One-time shots don't work, but we want to converse with people. And if we start with our students, and I think we need to go to them. I think it's difficult to go to all their different little committees. I know that committee time is so precious, and I would just rather make ourselves available and either before school, after school, lunchtime, be available and hear the voice. And if they don't come, then we'll try something else. I mean, all we can do is try.
That's exactly right.
So we have been here for almost 2 hours. Where do
Okay,
we
so I
want
think we need a motion on this for the committee, don't we?
a
Or are
motion
we just in consensus and we move it on to the board?
for the
Board
membership?
makeup.
I don't,
The committee makeup, is that what you're, the
Committee
committee makeup?
Yeah.
so the committee makeup, and I think it's evolving, Mark. I don't feel, you know, I think we have to start some of these engagements that we've talked about before we can even make a motion, or I'm not ready to say this is always going to be a 3-person.
No, but every committee has the option of expanding. It's in the policies. So it respects that.
So right now it's us, and I don't know what motion we want because
Okay,
that's where we are right now.
okay.
I don't feel we need a motion to.
And I agree with you, John.
We're not changing where we are right
Yeah.
now. We want to engage with people, and
Yep.
I think it's a ongoing dialogue. How the table changes. I'm not sure where we're going with that. I think it's something we have to pursue. Like Jack said, we'll see a trend. Maybe we'll feel we need, you know, voices here every single week to continue with some of the discussions. I'm not sure about that yet. So, what engagement do we want to start with? Personally, I'd like to start with students.
That'd be great.
You say the students? Yep.
Students. And I'd like to go to them. Tim, what do you think about hitting some students? You know,
Are we focused on the high school to start with?
I think so.
Yes.
I would like to focus on the high school to start with.
So I think, first of all, administratively, we're working to provide more opportunities for students to talk with us about items of concern. So I think in terms of your work as a committee, you can ask me and Randy to go back to Brian and the rest of the high school leadership
That's what.
around what it would look like, but it'd be good if there's some things, there are a lot of different ways to do it. So, I mean, one is having kind of, Dave spoke to the value of having, extended relationships, so kids feel maybe a little more comfortable about opening up and sharing. There's also a lot of value to having breadth, so having representatives from all of our groups, so a few years ago, the high school did something, and I think Larry Hale, was kind of instrumental with this. It was officers from all of the clubs and orgs, plus I think all of the captains from the teams, and they kind of had a leadership summit in the Heritage LGA. So I mean, you can meet with designated groups. You could kind of ask us to pull together kind of a leadership convocation like that. You could maybe, I love the idea of coming into the high school at designated times and just inviting kids to have, lunch at the table, or, maybe something during contact time. I mean, I think,
How free are the kids to move around during contact time? If we came during contact time, could they sign up to come and see us?
they could, so they could sign up. I mean, I think a challenge I've already run into this year when trying to have contact with high school kids during contact time is also there for academic support. So if I have big research paper for my English class,
Right.
I would love to talk to you, Mr. Shell, but I really want to get Mr. Hetzel's feedback on my draft. So, instead of having the 8 I had last week, I might have 6 this week. So you might want an all of the above solution, but with enough notice, kids are available in contact time. I think the other thing is at the high school, not all of our students, obviously the vast majority are, but we have some students who are really not proficient in English. So potentially working with Angie to facilitate a session,
That's really important.
to make sure everybody was included, could be part of it as well. There may be other groups that we may need to come up with some specialized strategies to make
Tim,
sure
how
we
about
connect with.
lunch? How flexible is lunch? Are people kind of churning through there? Or?
So what I would say about lunch is, and you've all been in the commons. The commons is noisy. So it'd be more like working to get a conference room or a classroom where kids could lunch with you.
Yeah.
And then I think you could do something during lunch. Could do an early and a late lunch on a given day.
So do we get 2 lunches?
So, the lunches are so good, I think 1 would be enough. But on the other hand, they are so good, you might want 2. So if necessary, we'll feed you twice, Jack.
So what do you think about starting with a lunch? And just making
That's fine. My
ourselves,
question is, will we get extended time with them after the lunch, or, because that's 35 minutes, which isn't a lot of time.
I think we just have to limit. And it doesn't have to be just once.
Yeah, well,
We just have-
it can't be at that, so that'd be more of warming up and telling them what we like to do, find out their level of interest and working with us, that sort of thing, maybe.
And I think you may find that an all of the above solution, which again, you can't do in a sprint. But I mean, I think visiting kids in their clubs and orgs, a lunch component, depending on how that goes, bringing something together that's got representation from the full gamut of student groups. I think there's also the timing of this, and you're going to want to consider very carefully. I mean, this is what's kind of called the adultism thing, So we want to hear from the kids, but when do we want to hear from them? Do we only want them to sketch the problem? Do we want them to provide some interaction with us as we attempt to problem solve? And then once we try things out, so I mean, we also have to think about not only how and when. The when has to also include, as we go through our process of trying to make things better, at what stages do we want students to be involved with us? And make sure that as we plan our progress, if we want student involvement along each step of the way, we need to recognize that may take some time. And I'm not trying to slow any of this down, because some of this work you know, as somebody who's been here since 1999, I wish we'd move faster on. I certainly do. But getting the student voice, we'll need to make sure we make time for that. So would you like Randy and me to work with Brian and his team and come up with some ideas about good ways to
Sure.
meet with kids and bring it back?
That'd be great. And I think if the soonest we would start would be after the holidays, after Christmas. You know, it'd be January. 'Cause
That seems reasonable.
the-
But maybe they can get some ideas and we can meet, you know, maybe
Yeah, we can meet to discuss.
we can
prep,
meet and
But I
discuss.
think the
what you
soonest the
found out.
meetings would be, or the engagement would be.
Our December board meeting is kind of late already. It's the 13th. So should we set another meeting tonight? Try to meet in December.
Yeah, so I think we should.
And if by that time, if you could get some ideas from Brian, and maybe we can at least proceed down, you know, what is the dialogue we want to have with the students? And then some ideas of when we could.
Rebecca, I don't know if, you know, on the laptop, you could maybe bring up Randy's calendar just for scheduling.
Yes, I have it up there.
Okay, awesome.
Tell me where to look.
Do we want to go that first week? I know on the 6th, we already have more meetings than we can schedule. So sometime that week, the 13th is our regular board meeting. I'm out of town the 14th. We just scheduled something for the 15th. Oh, but that's in the morning.
How about the 8th at 5:36 o'clock?
Which one?
The 8th at 5:30.
It's a Wednesday.
Wednesday. Does that give you enough time to talk to Brian?
It'll certainly give us enough time. I mean, with the Thanksgiving break, I can't guarantee that would be completely fleshed out, but we might be. So I think that would certainly give us
Or do
enough.
you want one more week?
Or the 15th? What's the 15th? Does,
The 15th,
Could
I
we
am
do-
busy from 6:30 on.
Can we do Monday the 13th?
that's our
We have a
regular
board
board
That's a
meeting.
regular board.
I think
How about
Wednesday
the
the 8th would
14th?
be
Oh,
fine.
you're not the fourth. What about the 16th?
I'm okay the 16th.
Is Randy okay the 16th?
He is at,
We've got a W2 there.
yeah, this is good. This is it. Do you have any?
Can we do this in the morning?
At
Could we do a 7:30 or would that be too early for you guys?
No, that'd be fine.
7:30, 8:30, 7:30.
If you want to go 7:30, we could do the 13th or the 15th.
If you want that week, or
I-
you want the week before.
Yeah. I can't do the 15th. I guess we could the 13th.
Because really the topic would be to talk
What about
about
the 20th?
how do we engage.
But the 13th is fine. We can do
Okay,
the
13th
morning.
in the morning.
7:30? 13th?
Are you bringing
Jam buns?
a
Van Bills?
bakery?
Tim, do you have something at that time?
That's the Standing Ed Services meeting.
Oh, it can flex.
That meeting can't flex, but I could probably miss it.
Okay.
They'll just assign more tasks to me.
Unless, or do you guys want to go the week before that? The 8th, the
I don't
6th.
think Tim's gonna be ready. Material.
Now, on the 14th, I could do an early morning.
How long is this meeting gonna be? Because actually, our
Yeah,
whole admin team is meeting at 8:45.
No.
Let's do the 13th at 7:30 to 8:30.
Okay.
You're really gonna hold a DEI committee that the community's been strongly involved in the morning?
I
Yes.
don't think we can say we can get our work done in an hour.
You know, and I think, you know, I do think the afternoon of the late afternoon of the 8th could work.
When?
Wednesday, the 8th.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I can do the 8th.
5:30.
So, again, we'd have to be done by 5, so that probably.
You know, what's the topic we're talking about? We're talking about how do we engage with the kids in setting up the plan? And Tim's gonna come with some suggestions. So that's the topic that we're talking about.
What did you say about the 8th, Mark? That's a problem with you.
I've got a meeting from 5:30 till 7.
What does the afternoon of the 9th look like?
Okay with me.
What about the 7th or 9th
Either one is fine.
in the morning
No, we're gonna go in the evening.
or afternoon?
5:30 works for me.
On the 7th.
On the 7th, 8th, or 9th.
Okay,
5:30 works for me.
how about on the 7th, Mark?
I would prefer the 9th, because there's a sporting event.
Yeah, it would be, if we go on the 7th, I'll need a 6 o'clock start.
Okay, let's do the 9th at 5:30.
Works.
Okay,
9th at 5:30,
got it.
7th, okay.
All right. I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.